Welcome to Module 6. In this module, we're going to look at the rest of the verbal system. Essentially, we're going to look at subjunctives, infinitives, and imperatives. Now, before we look at the material, let me give you a warning. There is a lot of material in this module, so make sure that you get a good head start on the material and pace yourself through it so that you can successfully complete it. Now, let's talk about the subjunctive. Just like the indicative, the subjunctive will have person and number. But unlike the indicative that has 5 tenses, the subjunctive only has 2 tenses that we need to worry about. The first is the present tense and the aorist tense. Now, the endings are going to be identical to the indicative, but the significant difference between the indicative and the subjunctive is that the connecting vowel for the subjunctive lengthens. And so this is going to cause some contraction when you look at the paradigm. And so when you memorize, so make sure that you memorize that subjunctive paradigm, and you can find that in chapter 31. And so in section 31.9, you'll find the present tense subjunctive, and in section 31.12, you'll find the aorist tense subjunctive. Now, since you already know the indicative, focus more on the differences between the paradigm that you know, the indicative, and the one that you're memorizing, the subjunctive. And so I always find it easier to work from what you've already memorized to acquire something new. Now, one more note about the paradigm. Note that the aorist subjunctive does not have an augment. And so we'll only have an augment in the indicative, the past time tenses within the indicative. So the aorist, indicative, and the imperfect indicative. Outside of the indicative, none of these past time tenses will augment, and that's true for the subjunctive. Now, the subjunctive can function as the main verb in the sentence, but more times than not, you'll find it in subordinating clauses. And these are clauses that are introduced with subordinating conjunctions, like in English, because, or so that, or with the result of. So some clauses in Greek require that the verb be subjunctive. And so a clause that's introduced with eon, if, in Greek, will always require the subjunctive to follow. Hina, in order that, will always require the subjunctive mood to follow. So look for those conjunctions, and if you see the conjunctions, you can anticipate the subjunctive mood to follow. Second, in this module, we're going to talk about the infinitive. The infinitive is similar to the participle, and then it will always be dependent on another verb. So in English, the infinitive is usually translated with the preposition to. And so it can either modify a verb. So in the sentence, I want is the main verb. To study Greek, to study is our infinitive. So I want to study Greek. To study is going to be our infinitive, modifying that verb want. But the infinitive can also stand in the place of a noun. And so listen to this sentence. To study Greek is divine. And so our infinitive, to study, is now functioning as the subject of this sentence is divine. And so just like participles, those infinitives that modify verbs, we're going to call them adverbial, because adverbs modify verbs or other adverbs. And when this infinitive functions as a noun, we're going to call them substantival. So adverbial infinitives or substantival infinitives. You can find the paradigm for the infinitives in chapter 32. And so look at section 32.5. When you look at the paradigm, note that the infinitives don't have person or number. So there's only one form for each tense and voice. And so the infinitive can take the present tense, the aorist tense, or the perfect tense. So ultimately, there are only 9 different forms of the infinitive. But note that for the present tense and the perfect tense, just like the indicative, the middle and passive voices are going to be identical. One more significant feature of the infinitive that's a little different than our English infinitive is that the Greek infinitive can take a subject. Up to this point, you've learned that the subject of a sentence has to be in the nominative case. But if the verb is an infinitive, the infinitive can take the subject in the accusative case. So what this means that when you're dealing with an infinitive and you see an accusative, you have to ask yourself, is this the subject of the infinitive or is it the direct object of the infinitive? And then obviously, if you have the accusative functioning as the subject, you can't translate that infinitive with the preposition to. You're going to insert the subject and almost translate it like a subordinating clause. Lastly, in this module, we're going to look at the imperative. The imperative will function as an independent verb. And usually you're going to translate those imperatives as either a command or with the negation, you're going to translate it as a prohibition. The imperative only has a second and third person form, both singular and plural. The second person imperative is usually translated as a command, clean your room. Whereas the third person is usually going to be translated sort of like a subjunctive, let him clean his room, something along those lines, or he should clean his room. And just like the subjunctive, you only have two tenses to worry about, the present tense and the aorist tense. And so you can find the paradigms for the imperative in chapter 33. The grammar for the subjunctive and the imperative is best understood in contrast to the indicative. The indicative is going to express reality. And so my daughter might come to me and say, my room is clean. And so that's an indicative statement. It's a statement of reality. My room is clean. And so she's saying her room is clean. If I wanted to shift this sentence into the subjunctive is going to express some level of potentiality. And so I might tell my daughter, you might clean your room. And so because of this, there's some level of potentiality, or it's a little bit more fluid. There's a number of different ways that we could translate the subjunctive. We could say, you should clean your room, or you could clean your room, or you might clean your room. On the other hand, the imperative is one more step further away from the indicative to express intention. And so in this sentence, I would tell my daughter, clean your room. One final note about both the subjunctive and the imperative. Note that by definition, both moods describe a future action. And so if I tell my daughter to clean her room, either in the subjunctive, you might clean your room, or in the imperative, clean your room, logically, the cleaning is going to be in the future. But both moods can be expressed with the present tense or the aorist tense. And so this means that outside of the indicative mood, tenses seem to articulate something other than time. And so in Greek, the present tense usually expresses some type of ongoing activity, whereas the aorist expresses an action in some undefined way. So for the imperative, for example, the present tense could mean clean your room and keep it clean, make it a habitual that you clean your room every day or every week, something along those lines. Whereas the aorist tense describes an undefined action. And so for the imperative, it might mean make cleaning your room your highest priority right now. Now that's it for this module. But before I close the video, let me go over the quiz. It's a pretty standard quiz. First, there's a vocabulary section. So make sure that you're learning the words from mounts, but also that you're looking at the supplementary vocabulary lists that we've provided for you on the Canvas page. Second, there are paradigms. I have 4 paradigms for you. Let me warn you, 3 of them are going to come from Luo or Amy. So make sure that you know those paradigms, the subjunctive and the infinitive and the imperative. The fourth paradigm, I'm going to ask you for one of the infinitive forms of pistuo. So make sure that you know how the endings look with contract verbs. Third, I have 2 words for you to parse. Now remember, when you parse, I'm giving you all the slots that you would need to parse a participle, an infinitive, an indicative, a subjunctive, an imperative. And so if you need to skip a slot because for example, an infinitive isn't going to have person or number, write none in those sections. And so make sure that you tell me and you indicate that you know that there's no person for the infinitive, rather than just skipping the slot. And finally, I have one sentence for you to translate. That's it. Like I said before, this is a pretty heavy module, so make sure that you get a jump on the material and just pace yourself through it. You're almost done with the grammar. We have one more module. We'll be done with mounts. So keep it up. Keep up the good work. And remember, if you have any questions about the course or if you have any questions about this module, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I hope you all have a great day.